Hello and welcome to another episode of Creative Career Talks. My name is Andrew Macklin. I'm an actor and a qualified career coach working with creatives in the creative industry. Rachel is a multidisciplinary artist making shows and short films. You combine dance, writing, aerial elements, sound design in your work. Your short film, The Undecided Vote, was featured in Dazed Digital and ELLE magazine. And your first full-scale live show, Losing Your Body, won the Wildcard Award at the Dublin Fringe Festival 2019. And it was nominated for the Irish Times Theatre Award for Best Movement Director. And you are currently a Dublin Fringe Resident Artist. Yes. I'm sure I got not everything, but a lot of things in there.
It's not my correct identity.
Where are you in the world at the moment, Rachel?
I am in lovely Tramore in Waterford. Got my mug to represent, just down the sunny southeast, and just in a house I just moved into, so I'm surrounded by boxes and chaos.
That sounds great. It's both peaceful in Tramore, but also a little bit of chaos going on. And of course, we're in the middle of COVID times, so it's proper chaos happening everywhere. What is it like? Well, I described you as a multidisciplinary artist because there's a lot of elements that you do and a lot of things that you draw together in the work that you make. And so it's hard to put a title on. I think artists and titles are always controversial things. But how would you describe what it is you do?
I tend to stick with the term dance artist because that's what my main training was in. So sort of to pay respect to people who've done other types of training. Do you know what I mean? I kind of just stay a little bit in my corner, but the reason I use the word artist rather than like saying I'm a choreographer or a dancer or a performer is because I do end up doing lots of different things. And yeah, I suppose I would describe myself as like an artist who makes shows and makes films, and they happen to bring together lots of different elements. You know, so sometimes I'm acting, sometimes I'm the one writing. Often I'm the one editing the music together because I don't have money for a sound designer. So like, when I did, ideally, that is, I would hand that over to somebody. It wouldn't be something I'd consider like my craft at all. So yeah, I just jump around. I'm passionate about loads of stuff. I love costumes. I love thinking about sound and thinking about how text can blend in with movement and stuff. So I just kind of jump in everywhere, making life a little bit harder on myself.
It feels like it's a developing thing. It feels like maybe there was a beginning in dance and these other passions and interests, and just the requirement of finances has meant that actually you've developed now quite a broad sort of spectrum of things that you kind of work in. Could you just, take us back to the beginning? Where did it start for you? What was the point where you kind of thought, not only am I passionate about these things, but I want to do these things professionally. I want to do it as a sort of living. Was there a moment or a point when that sort of became clear for you?
I can remember being a little bit precocious as a child and being pretty confident that I could get like a TV agent and become like a child star. I just could see that was a thing that other children in the world, like over in America mainly, had done. So I was like, well, if those children can do it, I can do that too. So from quite a young age, I was like, this is an actual career that people do. So I was already kind of on the hunt, but then I went and I did Red Kettle, like summer camp, which is the camp here in Waterford that you spend like 3 months making a show with other people your age. And that really gave me a taste for the fun side of performing. So I loved acting as a kid. And then I think I must have got a bit shy or something, but I went into more so doing dance. Got really, really passionate about ballet as a kind of like 9-year-old up to about 12. And then I remember around the age of 12, the teacher asking, who actually wants to do this professionally, because we would do grades. We were always taking it quite seriously because you had to pass an exam at least once a year. And I think I was the only one who put my hand up in the room. I was like determined, like I was going to be the next Anna Pavlova, like this is possible for me. But, at that age, you don't know everything that goes into it. So it's quite a straightforward, do ballet every day or every week, and then pursue that for a couple of years, and eventually you'll be professional. It's kind of, it's black and white, which was a nice thing to aim for at that age. So I was quite young, about 12, I think I decided I wanted to be a professional dancer. Yeah, I didn't really have the facilities in Waterford to do that, but I was determined.
So it sounds like there's quite a few sort of elements there. So one was the idea of seeing other people that were doing it and going, if other people in the world do this thing, then surely there's a little bit of me doing it. And then there was a little bit of that collaborative thing. It sounds like you got at Red Kettle, where you're around other people, and then sort of being called on to make a decision by a teacher. Raise your hand if you want to be. That sounds quite intense, but it feels like you were already, very much in that world and wanting to do ballet and wanting to carry on. So it seems like it was a sequence of sort of things. I find it interesting that, I don't know, I think as we get older, that capability idea becomes less of one we listen to. The idea of, well, other people are doing it, so surely it's possible. Yeah, we tend to develop more.
Totally. Now it's like other people are doing it, so I won't bother because other people are already filling up that space. Whereas a kid, I was just like, well, then, they're proving it's a thing that people do. There wasn't really people in Waterford I was aware of who were professional dancers, vaguely aware of professional performers, I think. But like now I realize Waterford has a lot going on. But at that age, I just wasn't aware of it yet.
Mm-hmm.
I sought elsewhere, Nickelodeon.
So you've already struck upon, I guess, something else that I'd like to ask about, which is around those challenges early on, because I guess quite often you could look at your situation very logically at that age, or a parent might, and say, well, you want to be a ballet artist in Waterford, there's not a ballet school, or, there's no logical next steps with that. So that sounds like a bit of a challenge starting out, but for you, looking back on it, what were the challenges starting out to this sort of passion that you were finding for dance?
Yeah, there was obvious challenges, and there was challenges I wasn't totally aware of at the time. The obvious ones being, like you said, there wasn't actually somewhere to do this level, the level of skill I needed to start training at the age of 12. It wasn't really possible. I did seek things out. I would go to summer camps. I went to one in Scotland and one in England when I was a teenager for 2 or 3 weeks of intensive training. And that really taught me a lot. And then I would seek out things in Dublin and travel there. That was a little bit later on. When I was about 16, 17, I'd go up at the weekends and go to a youth ballet company. But I think a little bit you don't realize just how much is out there that you're not, how much information is out there that you're not receiving. So you think you're learning everything there is to learn at that age, because that's all that you're being told there is to learn. And additionally to that, which I didn't know at the time, I had I currently have a lot of problems with my skeleton. It's kind of misaligned. So I wasn't aware of those physical things that were going to eventually hold me back as I got older. Because at that age, you're so malleable and you're so energetic, and those injuries always inevitably appear later. And the more you do intensive training and things. So there was kind of those sorts of things were already bubbling a little bit under the surface. But in a way, I'm kind of glad I didn't know, because it just gave me 6 years straight out the gap of being full energy, not realizing there was so many challenges ahead, but I still got to enjoy all those years so much, and actually learned a lot in those years as well. So I don't regret them.
You talk about that, having that energy as a young person, just going, I don't know about, physical inabilities that might crop up later on and the things that might happen later on. And it sounds like there was just this energy of going, I just want to do this. I just want all the information. And I wonder, is there anything from that period, whether it's the way in which you thought about what you were doing, that you still sort of use now? Because it felt like there is something around that that's very useful. And I wonder, is there anything that you still keep from that time that you kind of apply to your work and how you think about career now?
Yeah, I think actually what I was doing at that time, the energy I was giving, it was really pure, and it was totally without that sense of victimhood, that, oh my God, this is so hard and I'm so tired, which kind of comes in when you get a bit older. You start to go oh, poor me, life is really tough for a dancer. But at that age, I just thought, this is fucking brilliant. And I also, at the same time as doing ballet, started doing other dance forms, but in particular, a hip hop school opened directly beside our ballet school. So it was something out of, all my American dreams came true. I was oh my God, hip hop and ballet together. And so I started doing hip hop as well. And they had a really good competitive energy, healthy competition. And we would literally go to competitions and win prizes and do solos and do team stuff. And I learned a lot from that experience about pure hard work, and how it can just be a joy to do that and to win with a team beside you. And I think the only reason that later became a problem is that I didn't manage my energy that well as I got older. Mm-hmm. I continued to kind of push beyond what was necessary, really. It wasn't effective hard work after a while. Whereas at that age, it was you know, I would only use my energy when I was in class, and then you'd come home and you'd have a parent to cook you a dinner, and you'd have a parent to like schedule you things. So I was able to just like focus my energy on what needed to be done, really. Yeah, lessons to be learned as you get older.
That's really interesting. Just as to hear you talk about that kind of burnout from the point of view of, yeah, when you're a kid, you just get the opportunity to go and do the thing, and then your mind switched off, and it's like you've got a team taking care of food and accommodation and whatnot. And I guess it sounds like there is very different demands and structures you got to put in place as an adult artist to allow you that same purity of performance and not be exhausted by the other things. How have you, or this is always a balancing thing, but how have you gone about managing that balance yourself as you sort of developed as an artist? That sense of, there are some things I will need to put in place in my life so that I can be pure in my work. Yeah, what sort of shape has that taken as time has gone on?
It's been a very slow learning curve. My 3 years of intensive dance training in London, where I did my degree, were just crazy. I was good for not going out and partying. I wasn't really into that because I was a bit more like kind of hardcore dedicated than that. But I was too dedicated, I think. I needed to have maybe a lighter heart. So that took me a while to figure out. And then after I graduated, I was very hard on myself about what I wasn't achieving, and trying to do too much. So really, it was my last year in London, I realized like how out of balance I was. And I kind of just stopped doing most things. I just kept up my part-time work. I kept up a bit of teaching work and kind of backed away from applying for any auditions or anything, thinking about selling myself, basically, because I think that was starting to drive me a bit crazy. So literally and metaphorically. So I took a couple of months off, and it was my last few months in London. I decided I'd move home to Ireland after that. So I think for me, it was like slightly melodramatic, which is in keeping with my story thus far. So I had to sort of move country, or chose to move country, to make a big statement to myself that I was going to take a more balanced approach to this, that I accepted in myself that I actually really missed the countryside. I missed the ocean. I missed the slower pace. I like being around my family. Like, I think I wasn't actually thriving in a situation that was trendy, or a situation that was like the next hottest thing. I just felt overwhelmed by that atmosphere in London a little bit at that age anyway. So that's how I've kind of approached finding a balance, is like physically changing where I am, so that I'm reminded regularly of a bit more of a grounded way of living, I think. Maybe.
That sounds great, and it sounds like that shift in place really clearly was very helpful as a reminder that the things that I thought might enable me to thrive in London actually weren't really serving you, it sounds a little bit like. And that can be a difficult, I think, thing for a lot of artists, because there's an expectation around where they think their career should be going. And then there's other elements of them that are like, well, this doesn't fit, and this is not breaking a little bit, but this is where I should be going. Yeah. So before I guess I really want to talk a little bit around that move to a degree, because it feels like it was quite a big shift, and I think they're hard to manage. But what were your expectations? So you mentioned about going to London and doing your degree there, and it feels like that is, from doing something similar myself, there's a kind of trajectory that you kind of step into a little bit, where people go and they do the training, and then they go and hang out in London, and then they're a product that they're sold, and there's boxes you can tick success-wise as you go along that little route. But what were your expectations of your career when you were leaving training?
Because I'd had a really bizarre 3 years, where rather than feeling like more confident as a dancer, I felt like I'd potentially gotten worse, or like at least I was more aware of what I was up against, I guess. My expectations were I think I was pretty anxious by the time I was graduating, and my hopes, I suppose, were still that I would become a dancer in a dance company that was like pure dance, so like Rambert or Netherlands Dance Theatre, these sort of like, and I think because I always admired the aesthetic of those companies, but I wasn't that, and that to me now, when I reflect, just shows that I wasn't really in tune with what my strengths actually were as a performer, as a maker. I was still living off of this idealized goal in my life that I made up when I was probably 12. So we're talking like so many years later. So when I very first came out, I was thinking, okay, maybe that's what's going to happen. So I was applying for every audition that came up, and I wasn't really thinking logically about, like I said, like what my unique selling point was. I was just thinking about what I should be achieving because I live in London, like we were saying. So that was my first year or so, and it was all a bit confusing and strange. And then I think it was during my second year that I started, it was my second year of being graduated, that I found circus, so to speak, and got onto a course for a week-long bit of training, and then later got onto like a year-long training course. And that world shifted my view on what was possible for performance and what you could do. And yeah, that opened up a lot of different avenues, I think.
I love those phrase you said in there that really kind of rung a bell for me, which was that you weren't quite in tune with your strengths as an artist, that there was something about the work that you were doing in London that just, said to you, this is not quite aligned with what I naturally am great at. And it's interesting to hear then that trying something very different, it sounds like the circus stuff, really kind of opened up that world and go, oh, this specific mold of what you could do, pure dance-wise, there's actually a lot more potentially out of that. Was that an accident, or was that a conscious choice to go, let's explore some circus?
I reckon, looking back on it now, I can kind of still remember filling out the form. I think I was just applying for everything. So this opportunity came up, and it was with a company called Upswing. They're in London, and it was a week of training. I think it's called Step Up or something. And the idea is to take new graduates from like acting, from circus schools and from dance schools, kind of just a mixture of people, and train them for a week so that they get, because there would be a push to get more diverse people into circus. So I don't know how I got picked, but I got onto that anyway. And that was just 5 days of like a lot of laughter and a lot of fun, where for me, for the last 4 years or so, training had been quite a serious thing, and like something that I didn't have that much fun at in class. I had loads of fun outside class, but these 5 days I was just like being told I could do stuff that I didn't think I could do, and then by the end of the 5 days doing them. And that was like a really, I think literally for my brain, like the wiring in my brain, I think it shifted something from being quite tight and quite stressed all the time to being like, oh, I forgot this was fun. Reminded me of what I was doing when I was younger. So that 5-day experience really opened my eyes. I started researching a lot more about companies that I didn't know existed. And then when another opportunity came around, this time with Upswing and another company called Scarabæus working together, I applied again, auditioned again, and got onto that course. And that has definitely changed the course of my career, which is kind of crazy to look back on.
Epic. God, what I kind of hear there, which I guess I think is quite common actually, perhaps maybe, but the idea that the element that you quite enjoyed or quite liked in the circus stuff, what that shifted in you, and this idea of, well, actually it is fun, came directly, was very reflective of that experience you had as a child, going, oh, this is, and those two things being quite linked. Obviously you've found your way back to Tramore, back to Waterford, and we'll get into in a bit just the work that you are creating, both as a solo artist and all the other things that you're doing. But I'd imagine that shift to coming to Waterford after being in London, as it's not on the norm trajectory, there probably was some, I'd imagine some fear and anxiety around making that shift. It sounds like it was a jump to a degree. I wonder if it's too daring to ask, what were your sort of concerns or fears, or what were the cons to that decision of moving back to Waterford at the time?
Yeah, because I'd kind of grown up in London to a certain extent. I was there for 7 years. I moved when I think I just turned 19 or so. So there was that one big fear, was that, like, honestly, Ireland seemed like a foreign place to me. Like, I was so used to the way, like, really little things were done in England that slightly threw me here. So that seems odd to say now. I used to come home to Ireland all the time. It's not like I was even ever away for very long. But that was already kind of strange for me. But the anxiety around it probably was there for like 2 years before I moved home, because I think I knew I was exhausted in London for actually a long time. Like, for years I was fairly done, and I kept wanting to move home and feeling homesick, but feeling like homesickness was really pathetic thing to feel, and like a weakness in me, like, you know, I should pull up my bootstraps and just stay in London. And that narrative was definitely something I had learned by reading about my dance heroes and reading about these people who sacrificed everything for their art and, like, you know, did the most amazing work because they lived in the amazing city and all this stuff. So I think it's hard to undo stories like that you've heard for so many years of your life since you're quite young. So there's that. There was around about 2 years of toing and froing about the idea, and actually once I made the decision, which would have been about 8 months before I did eventually move home, that was the hardest point. And then once I made the decision, I had 8 months of being like, I'm so at peace with this decision, I'm just going to enjoy London as much as I can. The worries about here, I suppose, were that I guess that I would be a bigger fish in a small pond, but would that like satisfy me enough? Of course, when you get here, the reality is it's not like that. It's not like people are just sitting around waiting for the prodigal child to return from London. Like, it's not, it's, you know, tough going here, and you've got to get to know people, and you've got to do exactly the same stuff you do in London. Potentially there's even less opportunities. So it's like, is it more competitive? I don't know. But, you know, that all of that sort of like ego stuff is somewhat subsided now. I've realized, you know, there's a lot of work to be done here, and there's huge talent here. But when you're in London, I don't think you're aware of it, or at least I wasn't aware of it that much. I did spend some time getting to know the scene here before I came home as well, like kind of trying to figure out, if I did go home, what would I be aiming for? I knew I didn't want to move to Dublin because it felt like it was going to be too similar to London in terms of pace. And then I was like, well, what's the point in moving? If I'm going to go to another big city, it has to be a big change. And I didn't think I'd stay here for as long as I have now. Been here for just over 2 years. But things have gone really, really well for me here because people are so supportive in this community. So I haven't felt the need to, briefly I felt the need to move to Dublin, but I'm over it again.
It sounds like what's interesting is a kind of a practical element that you had around that decision as well. So there was time spent in Waterford kind of going, well, how exactly would I potentially fit in? What are the little elements that I could kind of do? And you've broken my dreams now with the idea of, I just thought I'd return to Waterford and everyone was waiting for
the red carpet, waiting for the Waterford airport.
just assume that would be the case. What was interesting now is, I guess, to find out, because it feels like that shift for you to Waterford from London was quite a big one in a way. There was stuff that wasn't working to a degree in London, and there was a shift, and it feels like things are very different. And, you know, it feels like, as you were saying, things are quite good in Waterford now. So looking back now at that decision to go back to Waterford, what does it mean to you now? How is it part of the journey? How have you sort of reinterpreted it? Because presumably at the beginning it might have been, oh, I need to get away out of London, need to escape this. And maybe in the middle of it, it was, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm a bit lost and all over the place. But looking back now, how does it fit into the whole journey for you?
Sorry, my window's open. Well, I think now London sort of seems like I had my training wheels on the entire time. And London also, it's like the 7 years have gone like this into a little tiny capsule, and they all just seem like I was just, my brain was just flying all over the place. And since I've come here, there's less to do in a really positive way, and it gave me a lot more focus. It's been, and at the same time I've been really, really busy and everything, but not in any way compared to how I was in London. And I think I was just overworking myself to no real benefit. So now the move just seems like it was just like a blessing, and I'm just really glad that I went with that decision, because it was a genuinely very tough decision. I think anything around your career is. I even kept it like a bit of a secret when I first moved home. Like I would have been very present on social media at the time, and I didn't put anything about it. I just like disappeared. You know, I was just like, I need to do this quietly for myself, and I'm glad that I did that now, because I didn't put any pressure on myself about coming here. And I wasn't here a day before I was already telling my mother I was leaving again. I was like, that's it, I'm moving to Bristol. I just landed in Waterford. The whole thing was, you know, a confusing moment, but definitely the first step towards making decisions that kind of honor what I'm good at, like I was saying, rather than doing what I think other people expect of a dancer, of a career in the arts, you know.
So it's really interesting. I guess it's always such a hard divide for people to manage and to really put trust and faith in actually what my strengths are. That's kind of where I'm good to go. But also I think it's really useful to hear that even after making the decision, there was like, no, I'm going to Bristol. And that what can look like in hindsight, very clear based career steps in reality are, you know, steps into the unknown repeatedly. And it's sort of so that's really kind of, I think really useful to hear you say that. And obviously you produced and made your first live show, which went to Dublin, and it feels like it did really well up there. What was the experience of doing that like?
That was phenomenal. That was like, even before it was performed and before I knew how people were going to receive it, I just felt like I went on like a mini apprenticeship with myself and had this task I set myself of producing a show, whatever happened. And it was kind of a blessing as well, because nobody knew who I was or anything like that. And you know, I didn't even know who to ask to do sound or who to ask to do lighting, because I didn't know anybody. Like, I was very much just arrived, and in that way it was kind of lovely because I felt no pressure. I was like, this could be shite and it doesn't matter, like, you can just try. And I think as well, a little bit of me was like, you know, you're just going to do this and then you're going to retire. Like, I had that sort of fatalistic feeling about my career at that point anyway. So what happened was I applied for a little room, which is the theatre space in Garter Lane, for developing new work. And so the day I arrived in Waterford, I went and I got the keys off Ronan, who runs Little Room. So I was straight into a month-long residency by myself. And that was very, very grounding. I was in the middle of the city centre and had something to do every day with my kind of free time. And in general, I found that when I applied for different residencies or bursaries, that people were very receptive. Some people I already knew, but mostly I didn't know any of the institutions I was applying for. So that was also really positive. It gave me sort of a sense of confidence in my decision to move to Ireland. So I was like, I found it very hard to get support in London because it's so competitive, but I found it easier here because people could see the real person who was applying. It wasn't just like a mass of numbers applying. So that was really helpful. And then I just set the goal of, so back in September 2018, I set the goal of getting into the Dublin Fringe Festival 2019. And so I was like literally waiting for the applications to open. I was just like, this is all I'm doing. I'm going to bring this show to this Fringe Festival. I'd done the Edinburgh Fringe with my friend's show the August just before. So I kind of had cut my teeth a little bit and understood a little bit what Fringe is like. And that felt like the right place for me at that time. So yeah, I applied for that. Thank God I got in. And then it was just a couple of months of absolute craziness and learning how to project manage and how to plan rehearsal space and how to plan your rehearsal time as well. Like, what to do with an 8-hour day is also really difficult, and with a 5-day week, all those things. And there was a couple of like kind of semi-low points, I would say, but mostly it was just a slightly stressful, very enjoyable experience.
I think it sounds like it started from a place of a commitment to you going, I'm going to make a show that goes in this, without knowing. There was the experience in Edinburgh, but there wasn't a sense of having made a show. So presumably you make that commitment and you're starting without having the people, skills, capability. Skills, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you had to learn a lot. But what's interesting to hear is that you started that process from a place of not knowing the things that you would need to do. And I think quite often when people start looking at making their own work, they can discount it as an idea by going, well, I haven't got the skills, capability, people start. So what advice would you give to people who might want or feel like they might want to create their own work, but are sat there thinking, oh, I don't know the people, I haven't got the skills, I haven't done a show before, so, you know, why bother?
Yeah, well, I think that it might not be the case for everybody, but I'd imagine the first time anyone makes a show, you are going to be taking a punt on yourself that other people won't necessarily know whether or not they should back you and whether or not they should give you their time for free, because often that is the case. You got no funding or very little. So you do have to kind of almost strike lucky, in a sense that you'll find the right person who's also available to be your other performer or be your director or whatever it is that you need. I would advise people as much as possible to ask for as much help as they can, and to let people volunteer. So if you ask for someone to help you and they agree to do it, don't freak out about that. Just say thanks and give them the job. Delegate. I kind of half got people to help me and then half did all the work myself anyway. I think I just didn't know how to, I didn't want to burden people, but they had asked for my help, or sorry, they had offered their help. So I should have accepted it more, I think. And the other side of that is then, of course, that you're dealing with, you might find that you're dealing with people who have offered more than they can actually give you of their time. They might end up being busy close to the show and stuff like that. So I kind of learned a little bit how to be very clear, and like I started to see my show as like a baby, like something I had to take care of that no one else was going to care about as much as I was. So I felt like I had to protect it, which seems kind of melodramatic now, but actually it, at the time, felt very real. Like these ideas that I have that I'm trying to portray, it's taken me a year to get it here. So at the last hurdle, I have to protect it from other people's schedules being too busy to do it justice. Does that make sense? Like not showing up for a meeting or something like that. So I did have to have one or two kind of tough conversations that felt more business-like than I felt able for, or than I wanted to deal with. You know, I wanted everything to be like friendly and collaborative, but unless people are getting paid, sometimes it's not easy for them to just be as into your show as you are. You know what I mean? So there's something there in terms of advice, like about be prepared that the people management maybe is the biggest element, I think, of producing a show, because the art side you've been practicing for years, but the teamwork side you maybe haven't had to lead before. That's certainly how it was for me anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear, because I don't think you would assume that going in. Potentially your mind, I'd imagine, is so taken up with, well, can I do this as a performer, and how do I get, when actually there's a practicality around how do I get people involved, and how do, not just taking up anybody to get involved, because this little baby of yours needs to be kept safe, as you're sort of making it as well. There's an argument against making theatre and going to fringe shows, which basically says you'll be financially ruined as a result of doing, you know, you'll put all this work in with blood, sweat and tears, and you'll go and you'll do a show, and, you know, you'll come out at a loss. And so there can be an argument around that from a purely financial standpoint. But what I'm interested in what you felt that process as an artist and a human, making that thing for the first time, bringing it up to Dublin, and it sounds like it's went down really well. Yeah, what has that given you? So now, having gone through that, how are you different? What's the benefits from having done that process?
The biggest one, which is the least tangible probably, would be that I now have faith in my the weirdness of my brain, is how I would describe it. I did a thing when I had no eyes on me. It was all of my brain into a 45-minute show or so, and I trusted all my instincts all along the way. It was easier because the story I was telling was 99% true to my life, so I was, you know, I couldn't make it up kind of thing, so I could trust that. But yeah, I did it. I committed to it. I took in people's opinions all along the way. Like I wasn't 100% sure on any of my decisions at any time, but I did stick basically to stick to what I felt I needed to do. And the reception has kind of told me that I should keep going with that I should keep faith in whatever it is that my brain had, whatever quality it was that it brought to that show. I should bring that to my future work, and that's a valid thing to be putting out there, you know, that kind of way. That's probably the biggest for me, as a biggest shift, and it's definitely changed my confidence. It's changed my kind of anxiety levels have shifted, lessened massively. Self-esteem, it's amazing really what that can do. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, because if you're just run with purely the financial side of it, as quite often I hear people discounting it, going, well, look, you know, financially, but to hear you say that you've got faith in the weirdness of your brain, as an artist, that's, I imagine, crucial. I don't know if there's a monetary price you can put on that. And it makes me sort of think as well, it feels like there's been quite a journey actually for you in how you sort of developed and grown as an artist and whatnot. And I wonder what things you don't worry about anymore. Because I guess some people I would meet are coming into the industry and might be in that early 7-year period that you mentioned about in London, where there's a lot of concerns around, well, how am I climbing the ladder and I'm not as good as whatever idealistic dancer there is. And so, what do you not worry about anymore as an artist?
There's been quite a few things, and actually I think lockdown has helped as a catalyst to getting past a few more things that I needed to stop worrying about. Also, the early ones, funnily enough, would be really practical things. Like I care a lot less about my dance technique, and I care a lot less about my flexibility. I still recognize those things as important because they're tools to be able to perform certain things on stage, and they're tools to have more vocabulary as a dancer. But I used to value myself and my self-worth on what I could and couldn't do practically. So I'm glad that I don't care about that like almost entirely anymore. I won't lie. There's days when I'm like, damn it, I wish I could do that. But realistically, I don't think about it as much as I used to. So that's amazing. I don't have to think about my appearance as much anymore. And that is partly because I'm more doing making, but it's also partly because I'm just deciding that however I look is the way I look, and that's acceptable. Dance is a really confusing place to be, especially if you start young, like as a teenager. And it's getting better, but it's just a confusing place to grow up, I think. So that's been really positive as I got older. And then on a less practical, more like, I suppose, emotional and mental place, I care less now about being seen to be busy. I think there was something that I was sort of overcompensating for when I was trying to be busy all of the time and be at everything. And I don't feel like I need to portray that anymore, because I think I know it to be true now in myself. I know I'm busy. I know that I'm working at what it is that I claim to be working at. I'm not faking it as much as I used to. I'm still faking it a little bit. So that's been really important. And lockdown also has helped me to come away from social media a little bit. I still use it and I still find it useful, but it was becoming a bit too much of my self-worth and my identity, and like other people's opinions of my photographs on Instagram was important to me, and it's not so much anymore. So that's been really helpful as well.
It sounds like that there's a reference point for like value or worth has shifted from my technique and how I'm sort of perceived on social media busyness-wise, down to a very sort of personal reference of how much technique do I need to do the things I need to do. How I'm looking is how I am. Yeah. It feels like listening to you say that there's been a really good shift in that.
Yeah, there was some point, I don't really know when it happened. I think it was probably around the time that I decided I would leave London in 8 months' time. Around that time, I think I had a real breaking point, and it was emotionally and mentally extremely difficult time. I was, so torn up about my decision. But what the reality of it was that I was realizing, like, who am I when I'm by myself? Because as a performer and somebody who has to be collaborative in a theatrical setting, in a rehearsal room and all that, like, you're with people and you're being perceived by people and you're thinking about that all of the time. And if you do that too much in your life, especially, I would have started, like I said, quite young, and I tuned into that too much. I paid too much attention to it. I think I just distorted my own self-worth by worrying about other people all the time. So eventually something thankfully came together when I realized I had to be who I was by myself with other people as well. And probably from the outside that didn't look that different. I probably I was always behaving in basically the same way, but it was how I was feeling. Like, was I feeling calm? Was I feeling relaxed around people? Was I worrying about what I just said? All that sort of stuff. So that came together, and now, like I said, it's that you can have those epiphanies, but they take time, they take practice, and some days are easier than others.
I think it's a great question to ask. Quite often when people think about careers, they're like, well, it's judged purely on where I am in the ladder, status-wise, money-wise. I think the question, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
You know, in the moment, I can say a lot. If it's like, well, continually stressed and undervalued, then maybe that's a part of the career that might need to shift or change. Um, we're all sort of on a journey, and I guess it can be really interesting to talk to artists about how they decide what is next.
Yeah.
For a degree, because quite often I would talk to people who are, you know, looking at moving forward, or I think sometimes there's a space between having done a project and achieved a new thing, and then there's a sort of, well, what next? An in-between space. And so I wonder for you, when you find yourself in those in-between spaces, how you go about moving yourself forward. I mean, I heard you mention earlier about, I just made a goal for myself to get a show on. Is there something that kind of draws you forward? Is it curiosity about different ideas or elements? Is it something you've seen? But yeah, in those in-between spaces, what do you use to kind of pitch yourself forward?
I think I have like a craving, but not for hunger, but for to see a certain thing on stage or to see a certain thing on film. And sometimes I see it and then I just get the craving to do that. So it might even just be like I have a craving to repeat a music video I've seen. I'm like, I want to see how they made that. Obviously it'll end up being different because it's mine, but like the thing I see will be so inspiring that I'm like itching to do it. And then other times it's just that I might be watching shows or watching TV shows even and not seeing what I want to see. I think that's what drives me forward. I'm not entirely sure, like for such a long time what drove me forward was to be seen to be moving forward. So you know, so it's still sort of developing for me. Like sometimes I definitely still take on work or decide I'll make a show for the wrong reason, you know, just to be doing something. So when I'm more working from an honest place, and it, unsurprisingly, is when I make better work. When I just really, really, really want to see that thing on stage. I have an image in my head and I kind of can't stop till I get something close to what I imagined. Yeah, I think so.
That sounds very. I think the need to be seen to be busy is probably what 90% of our industry probably drives off of a lot of the time. Yeah. But to hear,
or, you know, money or whatever if you need money.
Yeah, and all I think legitimate elements as well. Yeah. But it sounds like what I'm hearing is that for you, there's something around that image of a thing that you haven't seen that is a real crux that kind of pulls you forward a little bit, and to be listening to that. We're about to finish up, but I wonder, we spoke a little bit beforehand around, we were talking about the idea of mistakes in careers and and misguided mistakes and how they fit in, and I guess the value of mistakes, whether they can be good or bad potentially. But what are your thoughts on misguided mistakes?
Well, sure, there's nothing you can do about them once they're done. So first of all, give yourself a break. The first thing you'd say. But sometimes, like when the creeping memory comes up of something really stupid you said, or like, you know, a really dumb thing you did in rehearsals or whatever, I can't bring myself to think about it. But like, whatever that is, sometimes if you're in the right mood, rather than pushing it down and not thinking about it, it's kind of better to just have a little chat with yourself and be like, that probably wasn't the best way I could have handled that situation. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like for years, I wanted to blame other people for the fact that I didn't enjoy my 3-year degree dance training. They played a part in it, but I played a huge part in it as well. And like how I reacted and like whether I could have just made a more proactive decision, all those things, those are mistakes I've made. And I think it's definitely been humbling and difficult to take on that. Like I certainly wasn't behaving perfectly the whole way through. You know, I wasn't just this like victim of circumstance. I was a young adult who was like making mistakes and just learning as I went along what was the best way to handle myself and all those. You're in some bizarre situations, and if you've never been in that type of education before, if you've never been in those types of rehearsal rooms before, like you don't know what's going to happen, but you know what you'll do next time. Those are my thoughts on mistakes.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's like I think especially when you talk about the victimhood idea, I would definitely notice it with a lot of actors that would, have a certain amount of blame that they would put on their training. I was never given the opportunity that so-and-so film guy got. And so therefore, and then, the next 5 years, my experience was soiled by that. And the idea that no matter what's happening, you have a part in it. You are in relationship with it. So you're not completely absolved. There's something you're doing.
Exactly. Like, things are happening 100% all the time around you that are often mental. Like, there's so many insane people in the arts, myself included. And I just think, and we're all under pressure and there's all this stuff going on. But I think I spent too long in the victimhood place, and that delayed me moving on with my life and like taking action over my life. And like, if you're at the point, if I was at the point where I'd be blaming my actual body for things, it's like, well, there's basically nothing I can do about that. So what are you going to do? Rather than feeling a victim of circumstance all the time.
Thank you. If you can put that in a t-shirt or on a t-shirt that I could sell, that would be great. Rachel, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your honesty and your real reflection of your own journey, because I think it was just very detailed and I think really useful for me to hear, and I hope for others as well. So thank you for your time.
Oh, anytime. It's great crack.